Good morning, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. We'll get going here. It's 10 o'clock. Good morning and welcome everyone to our second Living Lab Club virtual workshop, this one titled Cows and Grass, Implementing Regenerative Practices. My name is Dan Cox and I'm the project manager for Manitoba Association of Watersheds. For anyone just hearing the name Manitoba Association of Watersheds, or MAW, for the first time, we are a nonprofit association that supports Manitoba's 14 watershed districts in their efforts to protect Manitoba's soil, water, habitat, and climate. Before proceeding any further, I would like to acknowledge that I am hosting this virtual workshop from my office in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is located within Treaty 1 territory for traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dene, and Dakota, and is the birthplace of the Métis Nation and the heart of the Métis Nation homeland. On Monday, we hosted a workshop that covered the topic of implementing regenerative practices in cropping systems. And today's webinar will cover implementing regenerative practices in the pasture system. Next week, MA will be hosting 2 more Living Lab Club virtual workshops with topics including cover cropping in southern Manitoba, which I'm really looking forward to, and the Living Lab Eastern Prairies experience, where we will be interviewing producers as well as AAFC researchers with their experiences over the past 3 years in the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project. All of these workshops are being funded through the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project, which is a 4-year project with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada that provides funding for farmers, researchers, and various partners such as watershed districts to work hand in hand on farms, developing novel tools and techniques that are tailored to local environments and needs. For more information on the Living Lab Eastern Prairies project, please visit the Manitoba Association of Watersheds website and the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada Living Laboratories Initiative website. There's some great information there, including one-page fact sheets around the AAFC research projects going on, as well as information on site tours that we just had and other media, and the newsletter that we released last year. Before I introduce our moderators for today's workshop, I would like to cover 2 housekeeping items. These Living Lab Club virtual workshops are being recorded and will be posted on the Living Lab Eastern Prairies websites and social media for viewing. So you can share those with other landowners that may, and district staff and others who may or may not have had a chance to attend today, or any of the other workshops that they may not have been able to attend. The Q&A function of this webinar is active, so please provide any questions you have using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and they will be answered either in the Q&A box by one of the moderators or one of the presenters, or during the Q&A sessions of today's presentations. I would like to now introduce the 2 gentlemen who will be moderating today's workshop. First, Mr. Michael Thiele from Shoal Lake, Manitoba. Michael was born and raised in Dauphin, Manitoba on a small mixed family farm. From there, Michael went on to study plant science in the Faculty of Agriculture at the University of Manitoba. Over the past 30 years, Michael has worked in conservation and agriculture with a focus on resource management in soil, water, wildlife, and growing food. Second, Mr. Blaine Hjertaas from Southeast Saskatchewan near the town of Redvers. Blaine has been farming for 48 years, 25 of which farming regeneratively. Blaine has taken his soil from 2% to 8% organic matter over the past 20 years. For the past 10 years, Blaine has been doing consulting work in the area of regenerative agriculture. And since no one came on to this workshop to listen to me talk forever, I will now pass it on to Michael and Blaine for today's workshop.
Thanks, Dan. Michael here. Yeah, welcome everyone. Just taking a quick look at the attendee list, and we have a very nice group, so welcome everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. What's that?
It's good.
It's good. Okay, so today we're going to talking about cows and grass and implementing regenerative principles. As Dan was saying, on Monday, we talked about cropping systems and had a really great 2-hour presentation. So we're hoping to do the same today. So thanks to Living Labs and Manitoba Association of Watersheds for organizing. And there's going to be 2 more events as well. Maybe Dan can mention that at the end of today. So I'm sure there was some of you that 2 years ago took in the workshops. We had Gabe Brown and Ray Archuleta. And there's a picture of us in Morden about this time exactly 2 years ago. And that does seem like a long time. That was just as there was whispers of COVID in the news. So we did 4 workshops: Shoal Lake, Swan Lake, Morden, Rosa, had over 300 producers. And yeah, it was just wonderful. And we were hoping to, of course, recreate that this year, but we're doing this instead. And it's a good second option. So there's myself, Michael Thiele, Blaine Hjertaas will introduce himself in a minute. Blaine lives over in Saskatchewan and farms west of Redvers. And then we have 2 producers, and that's really the heart of today's presentation. Cameron Hodgins at Lenore and Larry Wegner at Virden are going to talk about their experiences with cows and grass and good grazing management and soil health and all that good stuff. Please type your questions into the Q&A, and we'll have lots of time for questions and discussions. So here's the regenerative principles. And there are things like know your context, try to minimize disturbance, soil armor, diversity, keep a green plant living, integrate livestock. And we're going to talk quickly about those 6 principles and then hand it off to the producers. Just want to make a quick mention of this term soil health. It's an important term, and we maybe just sort of don't think much of it. But I think to me, the key is the health part of it. The point is that we only give that designation of healthy or unhealthy to living systems, whether it's, an organism like a human or a cow or a plant. But soil is actually a living organism. It's a living superorganism with, millions of different organisms doing the hard work to create soil. So it can be healthy or unhealthy, and we can regenerate it, which is really the cool part of regenerative ag. So when we talk about these regenerative principles, what are we talking about? Like, what is a principle? I had to go through this process, sort of going like, hey, what are we talking about here? What is a principle? Well, basically, it's just as best as we understand how the world works. It's kind of like a fundamental truth. It's sort of the first or the foundation of how we build up our understanding of the world. And that's based on science. And science is simply, we observe the world, we build a hypothesis, and then we go out and experiment and test that. And guess what? Farmers can do the same thing out on their farm. And that's something we really push in the work we're doing, Blaine and I, is to help producers to become observant, to observe how nature's working out on your farm. And really what we're talking about is just studying life. And, that's what biology is. And you notice I have life with a capital L, big L, and that, it's not just the life of individual organisms, but it's the collective life of the biosphere. So when we think about regenerative ag and try to define it, lots of people ask me like, okay, Mike, what's this regenerative ag thing? Anyways, you can Google it and you'll find 100 different definitions. And everyone can have their own definition. My simple definition would just be the rules of nature, right? As we best understand them, and apply that to how we do agriculture, how we grow food. And then there's all sorts of cool things like these sort of new ideas and like systems theories of how things are interconnected. But if you think about it more in a philosophical sense, regenerative ag is it's a shift in how we think about our relationship with nature and farming. So I'm going to pass it over to Blaine, and he's going to start with a few of the principles.
Thanks, Michael. Good morning, everyone. One website that you should check out for more information is the one at the bottom there, Understanding Ag. That's the company that Michael and I work for, and it is the world's largest regenerative consulting company. It works on at least 3 continents, maybe even 4 now. So it's a fairly major player in the game of understanding or Regenerating Agriculture, and there's a phenomenal amount of information on that website. So just go ahead one slide, Michael. So these principles that we're talking about are, you know, it's not something some guy in a PhD made up. These are natural rules of life. And it's really important, if you want to become regenerative on your farm, that you get these shoved in between your ears, so that when you're thinking about what you're going to do on that particular field or that pasture or whatever it is, you think about these principles and ask yourself the question, you know, am I going to enhance that process of diversity or armor or minimizing disturbance or whatever, or am I going to make it worse? And, you know, a lot of the things we do in agriculture aren't always positive for soil health. So maybe we have to do something like have a lot of disturbance for whatever reason. But then we say to ourselves, okay, that's a step backward, but, you know, I'm going to do this and this and this to help fix that problem. And so that's the key, is that so hopefully over time, then we're going to start to make our soil healthier by doing more of the good things and less of the bad things. So that's kind of the key. So we'll just go to the next one, if you would, Michael. So these, again, are natural principles. It's how our soil was formed. It was what was here before we came along. And they're all equally important. You notice there was no numbers on there. It didn't say number one is the most important, number two. They're all equally important. So the only one that is really man-made is this concept of context. And so we usually put it at the top because it sort of frames everything else. And there's really 4 parts to the context. So the first one is ecological. So where does your farm lie? Are you right along the United States border where you have quite a bit of heat? Or are you up along the tree line north of or in the interlakes? Or is your soil really heavy clay like in the valley? Or are you over somewhere along the Saskatchewan border where you're more into, you know, loam type soils? Is your farm low? Is it high up on a ridge? Do you consistently get rain? Do you in a very droughty area? All of these things are part of our context and can determine what we can do. You know, it might be great to say, I want to grow corn and soybeans if you're way up in the north, but likely it doesn't make any sense. It's not in context. So we need to think about that. The second part of context is financial. Do you have $1 million sitting in the bank and you're not too worried about a little bit of risk? Or are you stretched right to the nth degree and every decision is critical? Well, that makes a huge difference in how you approach these regenerative principles. So you need to be aware of that one. The third one then is societal. So that's things like, you know, in many cases we see, you know, a father and son farming together, and the son is quite gung-ho to try some of this stuff. And the dad says, hey, buddy, hold it here. This is mostly my farm and we aren't doing that here. Or maybe it's 2 or 3 brothers or 2 or 3 partners, you know, and one wants to do some of this and the other 2 say, no way. So we got to figure all this stuff out. And also part of it is our community. That, you know, sometimes when we do new things, there's some peer pressure out there that, you know, what kind of an idiot is that? You know, when you step out and do something different, people start to look at you a little bit different. So you need to be aware of these kind of things when you start down this road, and, you know, think about, can you handle that? You know, it's important stuff. And the last one then is spiritual. We all have different beliefs. It doesn't matter what your beliefs are, what you believe in, but it does make a difference in how you approach regenerative agriculture. So let's go to the next one then. We'll get into the natural principles here. So the first one that is important is armor or litter or surface on the soil, something covering the soil. So I'll use the analogy of my arm. And if I took this arm right here and stuck it into a fire for a minute or 2, it would hurt like hell, first of all, but it would probably burn a lot of the skin off if it was an intense enough fire. And likely the doctor would come along in a day or 2 after me suffering in the hospital and he'd say, sorry, Blaine, we're going to take your arm off. Because that skin, this skin on the surface of me, is incredibly important to my well-being as an organism. It keeps me warm. It keeps me cool. It keeps moisture in, keeps pathogens out. It has many, many functions to make sure that I am a healthy organism. Well, think of the litter or the armor on the soil exactly the same, that it is absolutely critical. If we want to regenerate our soil, we have to have armor on that soil. And you can just, this is a crop example right here. You can see the beautiful armor this particular producer has on his field. He's seeded right through that, and you can see the crop is coming up beautiful. Go to the next picture, Michael, please. So here we have one more example of why armor is so critical. And these pictures were taken last summer and it produced, this is a crop field again, but we could do the same thing on pasture and prove exactly the same thing. So this was taken, I think it was the 22nd of June. The air temperature was 25 degrees. And in the bottom left, this is a laser thermometer that you're seeing a picture of there. The bare soil was 55.1. So that's 30 degrees warmer than the air. And I believe this was right around noon. The pictures was taken noon. So it would have got hotter if I would have taken these at 3 o'clock. Then the top picture, the litter temperature, the surface of the litter, our armor, was 52. So it was almost as hot as the bare soil, not quite, but close. But then I just took the litter and just kind of scraped it away with my fingers, just so I exposed the surface of the soil. And under that litter, the temperature was 34 degrees. So it was slightly warmer than the air, but it was, 20 degrees, 21 degrees cooler than that bare soil. And so if we think about moisture, guess what happened on the left-hand side? There is absolutely zero moisture left in that soil. Now, we know we were in a drought last year, so why would I want my moisture to be evaporated away? I would sooner have my plants use it because it was damn scarce last year. And so if I have it like the one on the bottom right, where my soil is covered in litter, or the previous picture I showed you, most of that moisture will become available for the plants instead of evaporating. Also, if I was a microbe, I don't particularly like 55-degree temperatures. In fact, I likely would die. My optimum is somewhere around 25, 28 degrees is the temperature I really love. That's when I do my best work. So by having that litter on the surface, we keep those microbes happy. And when we want to regenerate soil, microbes are absolutely critical. Next one, Michael. So one of the other principles is animal incorporation. And if you think about how soil was formed anywhere in the world, there was always animals moving across it. And there's all sorts of wonderful functions that animals do. They chew the grass off, or whatever's there off, as they pull, their tongue wraps around the forage, they pull upwards. That tugging up mechanism actually stimulates root growth. It breaks things down underneath, releases an awful lot of sugar into the soil, which causes very rapid regrowth. So that's just wonderful. Also, microorganisms, we never have enough of those things. These critters here have the ability to spread them around. So they're consuming leaves that have microorganisms on them. They're putting it through the rumen, they're walking. So they may take it from where they ate it way back by those trees there, and then poop it out, somewhere different, where maybe those particular type of microorganisms weren't there. Also, if you've ever observed a herd of cows, you'll notice that there's constantly dust coming off them. Well, that dust also has microorganisms on it. So they're great spreaders of different types of microorganisms around the landscape. Next picture. So one more thing that grazing does that we don't often think about is that it gives us more length to our seasons. So on the right-hand side there, it looks relatively green yet. On the left-hand side, you can see it's totally mature. It's browning off. There's really very little life happening. And so Michael will start talking about the importance of green roots here in a second, or living roots. Well, on the left-hand side, there is really nothing happening there anymore. And this is pit down in July the 16th. So there's three more months yet, at least, maybe 4 months of growing yet in this year. Whereas on the right-hand side, it was grazed off 60 days ago, so roughly on the 16th of May, and you can see the beautiful growth again that came back. Now, I can do exactly the same thing on the left-hand side by running a herd of cows across it. So we can really increase the amount of photosynthetic capture by using animals moving across the landscape. I think that's it, Michael.
Okay. Thanks, Blaine. That's good stuff. Okay, I'm just going to talk about the last three principles, and this to me is probably one of the most important ones, and this concept is, I think, fundamental. If we go back to what I was saying earlier about principles and sort of fundamental truths of how these systems work, is that a green plant and a living root are the key to regenerating and building healthy soil. So if we take a look quickly at this is something I put together, call it the regenerative algorithm. There's a lot here, so please don't get overwhelmed by it. I was just trying to demonstrate that, you know, all these processes are interconnected, but let's just take a quick look in the top left-hand corner where we see the sun, and the sun is shining down on green plants, and photosynthesis is occurring where sunlight in the presence of a green plant, CO2 and water creates sugar. And that's the miracle of photosynthesis. And that's really how the whole system is driven. And it really is the only input that the earth receives all day, every day when the sun is shining. Everything else is just basically cycling. There's no more carbon on the planet today than there was 1,000 years ago or 1,000,000 years ago. It's just being cycled, the carbon cycle. Same with nitrogen, same with phosphorus, same with all the elements. So sunlight really is the thing that drives not just agriculture, but the biosphere. And you know, when you think of it that way, it makes you realize that if we're trying to grow grain or grass, that whatever we yield in bales or pasture or bushels per acre, it's a function of sunlight fundamentally. And it's not like water or nutrients aren't important too, but the more energy we can capture through sunlight, convert that solar energy into chemical energy, into that carbohydrate, the better we will do. And it is fundamentally the only way that we can rebuild degraded soils. So if you take only one thing home today, think more deeply about a green plant and a living root and sunlight. So here's just a quick example. This was taken spring, April, I think 2016, and it's a half section of winter wheat. And the point here is look at how green that winter wheat is relative to the surrounding landscape. Which system is capturing more energy? Which system can potentially yield better? You know, part of the reason why winter wheat or any fall cereal typically has yielded higher than annual crops, and I know, you know, current genetics may have changed that equation a little bit, but fundamentally the reason why winter cereals do well is because they're capturing more sunlight over more days than an annual growing crop. So things like winter cereals really fit in nicely into when you're thinking about keeping it green longer, and can fit into a grazing plan as well. And then this is the payoff, right? You get that green plant and that living root exuding those root exudates into the soil, and that attracts biology, bacteria and fungi and all that good stuff. And then you see that aggregation, those dreadlocks that form around the root. When you pull a plant out of the ground, whether it's a perennial or an annual, you should not see a naked white root. You should see soil clinging to it. And that's part of the process of building soil aggregation. And that's a biological process. It's constantly being built and degraded in a cycle. And the only way to keep that thing functioning and rocking and rolling is to keep that green plant growing. So the point here is that the plant and the soil are one, whether it's a pasture or a hayfield or a crop field. There is no soil without plant, and there is no plant without soil. They are the same thing, and it's been that way since plants colonized the land surface 500 million years ago. Oops. Next is diversity, and this one's super important. And it's kind of part of the context of understanding. We're farming on the prairies, and the prairies was a diverse landscape of plants and animals for the past 10,000 years since the last ice age. It was basically a big pasture with grazing animals, 100 million bison, elk, antelope, on and on, right? So diversity of plants and animals and insects and bacteria and fungi and worms, and the list is there. The point is that nature does not like a monoculture. We rarely see an example of where there is simply one thing growing. And you may say, well, that's a nice thing to have, but is it really an important thing? Well, there's lots of research showing that more diversity brings more overall productivity to that system. And here's just an example of some of the jobs that get done. You can kind of see a simple example of different plants and their root systems. So each one of those plants is doing a different job above and below ground. Starting on the left with Kentucky bluegrass, very shallow root system. We have a lot of that growing, in our overgrazed pastures. It seems to be the only thing that can handle it. But look at how little of the below ground area it's exploring for nutrients and water, compared to, say, like an Indian grass, which is part of our mixed grass and tall grass prairie. So the point is, all those root systems, all those plants do different jobs in the soil. And when they're missing, those jobs don't get done. And over time, that can be an issue. And of course, one of the jobs they're doing is pumping carbon back into those systems to rebuild soil organic matter, soil carbon. And just a quick reference there to work that Sokol did 2018, showing that the inputs from roots, the carbon inputs from roots are 2 to 13 times more efficient than the above ground litter biomass forming soil organic carbon. So our understanding in the past was that, it was the biomass of the plant that ultimately became soil organic matter. That's probably not correct. And more importantly is to have that root and that plant pumping carbon into that system. So more roots equals more soil carbon is the simple understanding. And then finally, minimize disturbance. And it's not like disturbance is a bad thing, but when it's chronic, it can be an issue. So, examples of disturbance are tillage. Overgrazing is a disturbance. And, civilizations have come and gone because of overgrazing. We know this from history and anthropology. So overgrazing really is sort of a chronic grazing of an animal over time, repeat, versus what our understanding now is something where you can have a disturbance, an acute disturbance, a one-time disturbance, say like a high stock density grazing, mob grazing, all these terms, AMP grazing that are being used. That can actually be beneficial if then proper rest is given. And then other examples, fertilizer, pesticides, monocultures, all these things are disturbances that over time can have consequences. And some of those, consequences of chronic disturbance are loss of soil carbon, soil structure, biology. Less plant means less capture of sunlight, decreased water infiltration, and loss of biodiversity. So really, when we think about grazing management, what we're going to talk about here more, starting now with Cameron, is that we can use grazing management, good grazing management, to accomplish our agricultural and ecological goals. And that's, super hopeful. And I remember a line from Provenza calling good grazers ecological doctors, where you can actually, sort of heal some of these issues by good grazing. And I always thought that was cool to kind of think of good grazing as being an ecological doctor. So there we are. Those are the 6 soil health principles. Any questions? If you have a question, you can type it in. We can stop here real quick. If there's no questions yet, we can load up Cameron's presentation and get on with that. And then we can come back at the end, and if you have questions on the principles, Blaine and I can answer those. Okay, seeing no questions, let's load up Cameron's. Cameron, are you there?
Yep. You want me just to share my screen, Michael?
Yep. Yeah. So Cameron and Lisa Hodgins farm near Lenore, Manitoba. And I'll let maybe Cameron say a few words of introduction and get right into his presentation.
There, can you see that full screen?
Yep, looks good.
All right, well, just thanks for Michael and Blaine and Living Labs and Law for asking me to talk here. I'm not an expert in anything, but I'm here to share what we've kind of learned. I guess my wife and I, Lisa, and our 4 kids, we operate our farm here just outside Lenore. We got a cow-calf yearling operation, grass finish, a few beef is our kind of probably our main thing. We do have some other animals on the farm. We lease to direct markets a little bit. Farm loosely with my dad. And I guess we've been doing amp grazing for about 15 years, just kind of learning as we're going. And we're darn lucky in our part of the province. I think we got lots of people who are trying different things and progressing different grazing practices, and it's interesting to get together sometimes and bounce ideas off people. But I guess these guys really alluded to the fact that we need to look after our soil, and these were just a couple of soil plugs I pulled out in the fall time last winter. And Michael and Blaine can probably add a lot more than me, but we're really looking for that soil aggregation, that cottage cheese looking stuff on our ground. And we know in the last few years water's been really important, and if we can soak up more of the water when it comes in those big dumps, then we're keeping it for later. So just going to the adaptive multi-paddock grazing, I think a lot of people on this thing know what it is, just kind of moving cows around to the grass when it's ready and having a plan. And it's been exciting to see on our farm, you know, some of the changes that we've made and some of the things we've screwed up and hopefully learned a little bit from, and just to see how the cows react to the ecosystem. And then becoming an ecosystem observer is really where I think the big changes happen for me, seeing how the animals interact with our animals interact with the ecosystem and the wildlife, and getting talked to some of the people, NGOs who are looking at different ecosystem services we can provide as producers, and seeing what we're doing already and how it benefits them. And maybe if we can make a little change here or there, it's benefits the whole ecosystem. So this is just a quick clip from the sacred cow thing. Obviously, I think a lot of people here, continuous grazing, just you kind of got 4 fences and the cows eat till they're done, and we want to get out managed grazing. We're just blocking it off into small little bites. And it's really been done with, I guess the big thing is having a plan. I got a couple of spreadsheets made up for whether we're grazing cows or yearlings or combining them. And I got a little map on recording when and where cows are at a time, and just to figure out ahead of time and where we want the cows, and if it's going to work out. And if it doesn't work out on paper, it's probably not going to work out in real life. So planning is a big part of our operation here for the grazing side of it. And making that plan work, portable electric fence is pretty critical. And I can't quite say enough, is make it easy for you. If it's not easy, it becomes difficult, then it's easy just to take shortcuts. And we've just come up with some little innovations for our place that works in our farm, is I can set it up in one pass with my side-by-side here and put the posts in, and utilizing bat latches to get animals into different areas if I'm not available to be there at a certain time. We're moving cows at least once a day in our place, so the bat latches are handy if I'm at work or Lisa's busy doing something, or if we want to move them right around lunchtime is usually when we want to hit it, where the sugars are highest in the grasses, and they can get in there and provide a big benefit to the soil as well as the cows. So to get them onto it, a lot of times what we do with those bat latches is put the mineral and salt right at the gate. Then once 1 or 2 find it, they'll get through the gate. But make it easy for yourself. because that electric fence is irreplaceable. A lot of people, you can manage those animals pretty tight once they start to respect that electric fence. Here we got, I think it was 300 or 400 yearlings in a go, and they're just waiting to go through that gate. And I did video it, so if everyone wants a video of the yearlings going through, it's interesting to see how they respect that little 1-strand wire. And the other thing with electric fence, it makes you be able to change on the fly relatively quickly. So if you graze too much or not enough, the next time you set it up, you alter what you're doing. So it's with those daily moves and the portable temporary electric fence, you can change on the fly. So here's just a couple of pictures of some of the grass we're managing here. This is kind of a low area, and typically it grows good. In 2019, it had good growth. So we left quite a bit of residue just getting around to keep it green, like what Blaine was talking about. But then this past year, it's the same pasture, but there wasn't as much growth. So we utilized more of that grass to get through, because one of my goals as our cow-calf is to graze on those shoulder seasons as long as I can in the spring and then late into the fall. But being pretty aware of the economic, what it costs to do that, what are the economic advantages of it. And this year we utilized the grass pretty heavily, but as you can see, they didn't get down to eat that old thatch. I didn't put any thatch down this year, but they didn't take the old thatch. So as we increase our utilization and eat more grass, that recovery period's got to go up significantly. And I don't have a formula or anything specific, but monitoring the grasses and seeing how it's growing, because I think this year everyone was looking to see when their grass was regrowing, and it wasn't. It was it seemed like you grazed it, then after a week or two it would green up or just stay green but not really take off. But in this system, when we got those August rains, it just seemed like everything popped just a couple of inches by getting off the grass and giving it that little bit of recovery time to let it to regrow. So recovery, I guess that's probably the most important thing that we can focus on our farm, is seeing when that grass is regrowing. And this was just an interesting picture. Just you can see all those cowbirds in the back, and this was this summer, and this was late August, and we still had lots of grass ahead of us. So just focus on recovery. And for me, I'd rather take more grass down than come back to a paddock before it's ready to be grazed. But recovery is number one in our place. And going back to that monitoring, like Michael and Blaine are always harping on guys to get a shovel out. So I was walking through Princess Auto one day, and there's this little wee kid's shovel. Kids keep taking it from me, but it's one of the best things because I just throw it in the back of my side-by-side. It doesn't take up much room, and the amount of times you pull it out and just dig up a chunk of soil to see what it's looking like, it's invaluable. And the other thing is I got a refractometer, and I look at the bricks every once in a while, and just to see how the grasses are doing. And I don't do a good enough job of documenting those bricks readings, but it's interesting to see those numbers. And some of the experts are talking about the higher bricks numbers, because we've had some sweet clover up around 30 and some brome around 17 or 18, and sometimes it's lower, but I see a gradual increase on those bricks readings. And another thing, just monitoring the height of the grass. And we've all got them, but the cameras are one of the best things, just to take pictures and compare one year to the next, because I got a bad memory of what I did last week, let alone last year. So if you take a picture of a certain paddock, then you can scroll back through and see what it looked like the year or two previous and monitor some of that stuff. So use your phones, because we got them all the time. Another big part is just being adaptive. So this year, when our growth was slowed right down, we decided to combine our cows and yearlings, and it worked out for the most part, but it sure allowed to let the other 2/3 of our farm recover by grazing them in one big herd. It worked out very well. I mean, we had to change a few things where we had to create some corrals and different things in other paddocks where we wouldn't normally, to get ready to move some yearlings out. But that's if farming was too easy, it'd be no darn fun. So we, I think as producers, we like to sometimes challenge ourselves and don't get stuck into the status quo. So being adaptive is part of the fun thing, looking at stuff, observing and changing. So just kind of switching gears here and going over some of those soil health principles that Blaine and Michael went over quickly. Context for me, it's kind of the ecological historical context. Where are we on our land? I think a lot of people on this thing, we're on the grasslands where bison served a huge purpose to the grasslands. This was taken at Riding Mountain National Park when we were up there a couple of years ago, driving through the bison reserve, and it's just really hitting home the last few years how important beef production is. We're one of the last commodity enterprises that can function actually within an ecosystem and thrive and be part of a thriving ecosystem. I think some of the people involved in conservation, and they're starting to realize that, and we need to be able to share our story with them and let them tell our story. But they got to be managed correctly, these cattle. So here's a picture of Riding Mountain National Park, and a picture of our farm. And I think a lot, it's just similar. When the cattle are managed correctly, they look like one and the same. Managing the cattle the same as the bison would be, and it's just interesting to think about what your land would look like 300 or 400 years ago. Diversity is one of the probably most interesting things we've noticed on our farm. And this is a picture of some purple prairie clover where it's about 100-acre hills pasture that we've managed kind of, within the AMP style grazing for the last 15 years. And this purple prairie clover didn't start coming until we gave it some adequate rest or recovery period. And this paddock here, my dad's been here his whole life, and he said to me a couple years ago, he knows there's more grass there than there ever was. So those are the interesting things that I log in my memory, because I don't do a good enough job taking pictures. But when your dad's telling you that's makes you feel pretty good, because it's something's changing. And another part about diversity, we all know, Michael went over the insects and birds and bees, but there's all sorts of bumblebees and fireflies around our place and in other places. But they serve such an important job that's really hard to quantify, is the pollination and different things they support. But it's interesting to see these things interact, just like I said earlier, with our livestock and what we do. And on the right, seems like there's more raptor birds around our farm or our area. And maybe it's some of the changes we made. I can remember as a kid, me and my brothers would go out and we'd poison gophers, but since we've stopped doing that, I guess it's been quite a while now, it seems like there's more and more predators that look after those gophers, or those issues, or what we'll call them. So they just going back, it's maybe a slow process, but nature will take care of itself. And with diversity, just creating a living root. And I guess here's a picture of just some different plants. Some people might call them weeds, some might call them forbs, but those different plants create different rooting zones, like Michael had a picture of there, and hopefully bringing up different minerals and things. Fred Provenza's got some pretty interesting information about different minerals and different plants. And another thing about the living root and diversity, if there's a lot of big diversity of plants, hopefully something will grow at a certain time of year that's green and vegetative for those cows to eat. And I think I'm starting to lean towards, we can probably stockpile a couple paddocks for a whole season and just let them build up some litter and just let other plants thrive. And just there's a picture of a monarch butterfly you obviously can see. So it's interesting, some of the diversity that's going on in some of the farms here. Living root. Picture on the right, the pasture we managed. Picture on the left is a continuous graze. And I mean, it's in a low saline area. And just that living root, a couple of years ago, Steve Applebaum was out doing some touring around farms, and we drove around and we stopped and we were talking about these alkaline peat patches all over the, our little pothole country here. And he said, I was quizzing him what we should be doing. He said, well, just look what's growing on the edge. And if you look there at that alkaline patch on the right, stuff's creeping in. It's not like it all just starts growing at once. There's something growing there, and maybe the cows aren't going to graze it, but there's something growing. There's a living root in there growing in that horrible stuff and getting that, priming that the soil biology in there to keep going. And through its succession, it'll hopefully slowly creep over to a grass type area, but just grazing it and then getting off it is allowing stuff to grow. And I imagine Blaine would love to talk about water infiltration right here, but we'll just keep trucking along. So another little picture just of soil armor. These two pictures were taken inches apart, and the black dirt there was just a gopher hole. And on the right was just one of the pastures we were managing with our yearlings. And I got a thermometer in with my refractometer. I stuck it in the ground, and this was June, and it just blew me away, the temperature difference. And it was a hot day. I want to say it was 30 degrees or something like that, but it just blew me away how much energy that black dirt absorbed over the green vegetative growth. So the green vegetative growth, this is on the right there, selectively grazed ground cover, just the residue we left, the ungrazed cover where they're grazing. So that's I call that standing ground cover, what we're doing there, just keeping something above to protect the soil. And this is a non-selective graze or a ultra high stock density graze where I've got that litter. It's either been grazed and the litter's either manure or tramped right to the ground. So I'm going to guess this was close to 500,000 pounds an acre. I did a little side pot there one day, and just to see what it would do. But just making sure there's no bare ground. This is probably not something I'd do if it was raining, obviously, right? But it was, the opportunity presented itself, so we gave her a whirl. And animal integration, like Michael talked about a little bit about how, if managed right, it can make an improvement. If managed wrong or poorly, it can actually have a detriment to the ecosystem. And when I'm managing cows, I'm kind of either figuring 3 or 4 different things, whether I'm trying to get as many cow days as I can, or if I'm trying to get gain on those animals on yearlings or grass finishers, or am I trying to do a land management structure where there's maybe some brush encroachment or some noxious weeds I want to hammer out? What's the goal of my cattle in that particular pasture at that particular time? Because I think if I want to get as much gain as I can, I'm going to run out of grass if I'm trying to do that with every animal. So I'm always trying to balance those 3. What's the main goal, and looking ahead and trying to figure out what's my overall goal. And sometimes it's maybe shifting gears or being adaptive again. So just going back to that soil health, if we look after our soil, it's going to kind of hopefully look after us, whether it's through water infiltration or cooling those plants. Just this spring, I was out digging some of these holes. Michael and Blaine have been harping on me to dig. So in our managed pasture, I forget it was April or May, there's moisture in there. You could ball up dirt, but in some of our cultivated acres, you had to dig down quite a ways. It was till you got beyond dust. So that soil armor is definitely important. And seeing those root aggregates fill out, and just that thatch on the top to help protect the soil as well. So I'm just going to quickly go over some of the economic things on our farm, what I've recorded and looked at. So this is another one of our pastures. The left is continuous grazing and the right's amp grazing. And, they both look pretty vegetative, and there is growth on the continuous side, but just looking at these numbers here, so the numbers I really want you to look at. So the guy this past summer, 2021 continuous days, he was in there for roughly 145 days. And these are 2 similar sized paddocks with similar lay of the land. 588 acres, he had 50 pairs in there. They're bigger pairs. So what I'm doing is I'm charging a custom grazing rate to figure this out. In my thought, if I can't make money custom grazing my own cows, then maybe I should send them somewhere else if I can't do it for cheaper than that price. So on a cow, I figured his cows are bigger than mine, so I'd pay him $1. I have to pay him $1.30. He'd have to pay me $1.35 to graze. So he had no yearlings. So the animal units he had on there is 105. So I want you to really focus on this gross income though. $9,700 of gross income for that great growing season. Versus our amp grazing here, we had, whoops, sorry. We had 90 days up there on that one particular section while we let the other 2/3 of the farm recover for spring and fall grazing. So we had 160 pairs up there, and they're smaller than his cows. So I'm just charging myself $1.25 a day. It's 75 yearlings up there. I'm charging them like 75 cents a day. So we had 340 animal units up there for that time period. It was less days, but we had $23,000 worth of income. Plus we went back and grazed for, I'll say, close to another 80 or 90 days at home on the stuff we let recover. Does that makes sense to everybody? So what I'm doing is I'm kind of comparing apples to apples here and taking two side-by-side sections, managed a bit differently, and using a custom grazing rate to put numbers to it. And it kind of blew me out of the water to start with when I put these numbers together. And I think we can push these numbers harder too in some ways. And there's different ideas, but I could get on that, and I'll keep moving on here because I'm slowing down. So winter grazing, by allowing some of that stuff to stockpile and winter graze, this year we did a little bit of winter grazing, but last year with not much snow, we winter grazed well up into February anyways on standing stuff. Or sorry, middle January on standing stuff. So the economics of that, they're also, I don't have anything compared to, but I'll show you our numbers. So last year on 30 acres, just as an example, we had 125 cows, dry cows, and I was figuring it would cost about $250 a day to feed them just hay last year. So then the net is $1,400. So I grazed 125 cows on 30 acres for just 9 days. So it doesn't seem like much, but you put 7 or 8 cent hay in front of that, and it adds a pretty big economic advantage. And the other thing we did with that pasture is the yearlings went over and clipped it and kept it vegetative. And so in my mind, the yearlings paid for the pasture, and the cows were all profit. So that's another benefit of having two separate, let's say, herds to manage different pastures. Grazing annuals. A couple years ago, we had some fall rye sown. We had 200 yearlings, a mix of custom and owned, and this is 500,000 pounds per acre. We moved them 4 to 5 times a day, and the goal was just trying to get some feed into them and lay that rye down to create a good thatch. And it took a little bit of management, but it was close to the house, and we could do it relatively easy, and there had access to water relatively easy. But grazing that rye cover crop, I figured the price of the seed, I rented the no-till drill. So we had 200 yearlings. I was there for 15 days on the 20 acres, at 75 cents a day. So I'm not counting anything for land value or rent or whatever you'd like to call it, because I drilled into it for green feed. So this was it was a bit later, but it was profitable. I had $82 worth of income per acre. and are not even factoring in what's the fertility value, what's giving those other perennial pastures a little bit of a break early on in the season. It's those are just hard things to wrap your head around for me to value. But it was interesting to see, yeah, we can integrate annuals and cows on a relatively small scale and be profitable. So this is something we've tried the last few years with it being a bit drier. We've swath grazed some sloughs, and what we done is take the hay bine out, and then we got a big dump rake and rake the rows up. This year there was lots of we could get pretty deep in there, obviously, with it being a bit drier, and cut those bulrushes and cattails, and then I'd go out and just supplement on top with a bit of grain and camelina meal for some extra energy and protein, and we got quite a few cow days out of it. It's becoming kind of appealing to me, and I guess the other thing too, just opening up those sloughs for us in the future to change, hopefully some of the species of the plants in there, open it up for something else. And we've discussed, Dad and I discussed broadcasting other things in there, but it just seems like it's, I don't know, it's pretty big expense to get some seed in there to try, but I'm not saying it's off the table, but I don't know if we tried it on all of them. So these are my numbers on the swath grazing sloughs this year. So this year winter I had like 215 dry cows there. It was 20 acres by Google Maps. I was figuring again 250 a day, but I think that's maybe even low this year for what it would cost to winter a cow. So if the cost of supplement in there, the cost of cut and swath it, and then I didn't factor in much for going out and moving the wires on a daily basis, because the other alternative was to have them on bale grazing. So in my mind, I was going to be moving that wire any day anyways. So there's a pretty good return to acre for this, because we've already grazed this in the summertime, and they wouldn't go and touch those cattails. So that's really penciling out. And the other thing is the standing cattails we left, they didn't impact them the same as they impacted the ones in the swaths. So going back to some of the stuff that Michael talked about here, if we focus on the principles and we learn to implement the practices, we get the products, which will ultimately lead to profit. And as producers, we really need to focus on profit before production sometimes. And I'm not saying we don't gotta be good at all those, but just if we create a good foundation of those principles and looking after the soil and the land first, it can progress us further. So I guess in closing, what side do you want to be have cow on? Or this is the same picture there, just a couple weeks after the other one. Continuous versus amp grazed. And hopefully I didn't put anyone to sleep, and I'm happy to answer any questions if I can. Like I said, I've tried some stuff, had some success with things, but I've also screwed up quite a few things. Thank you very much.
Cameron, thanks. That was excellent. And let's just check the Q&A here. I don't see anything yet, but I'll start with a question. When you showed the slide with the paddock that you had high stock density grazed with like 500,000 pounds, and yeah. What was your plan after that as far as recovery?
The one on the perennial pasture, Michael?
Yeah.
I was just seeing what happened, and my plan for that was I was probably going to leave it for quite a while. I'll go back to that picture if I can find it. Does that make sense, Michael? Like I was off work during those few days, and they were in a good location to really try it. I didn't have anything. Can you guys see that?
That one. Yep, that's it.
I didn't have any nets necessarily planned. I just wanted to see how the ground or it would react to that high stock density grazing. And I think sometimes we get impatient as human beings, do we not? That it might not be your 1, 2, or 3. It might be different things that are interacting there, or even like you said, digging up the ground. Is that an answer for you, Michael?
Yep. Yeah. I guess, like some people could look in on that and go, oh my God, that's like severely overgrazed. But it isn't, right? It's been severely grazed, like a one-time kind of event. Like I was, describing the difference between like chronic, where you repeat, if you were to repeat this, right? And allow not enough recovery, then you'd end up in a negative overgraze situation. But you can use this sort of one-time disturbance to actually jumpstart that system.
Right.
I think maybe it's important to explain a couple definitions about what overgrazing
right.
is and what severe grazing is.
Good
So
idea.
overgrazing is when we graze it, and in about 4 or 5 days, the plants begin to regrow. So we start to get new shoots coming up, let's say 5-6 days, depending on the conditions, depending on the time of year. And cows love that new regrowth. So they'll come back if they have a choice, and they will nip it off again. When that happens, that's what we call overgrazing. So the whole idea of managed grazing, planned grazing, app grazing, whatever the term you want to use, is to put cows on, and it doesn't matter whether you severely graze or just take the top off. So severe grazing, and if we have a plant really tall, severe grazing is taking it to the bottom. Taking half or 1/3, that's also options. And you saw some of Cameron's pictures there where he did both. And there's no right or wrong here. That's part of the art of grazing. But the key then is to make sure that when you're grazing, those animals are moved within roughly 5 days. So whether you take it down severely, take half and leave half, it doesn't matter. Get them across that landscape, basically impact every single plant on that, whether it's 1/4, whether it's 5 acres, doesn't matter. You want to see all of the plants impacted by the grazing animals, and then move them ahead onto, in this case, you got more grass to go to here on the right-hand side.
Yeah, I think that's part of being adaptive, isn't it, Blaine? Like just realizing what's going on for the particular year, whether stuff's regrowing, or like last year it just seemed to kind of, it was growing, but it just seemed to stall out. And if we would have kept on with my original plan, we would have got over and just grazed the top half, and we would have run out of grass, right? Like, so it's just
Absolutely
adaptive and allowing that recovery period to have an adequate time to take place.
We all had great plans last spring, but Mother Nature changed the plan about rainfall, so we had to be adaptive, or we would have been in huge problem. And many people that did continue on the same as always, especially with continuous graze systems. I saw lots of people feeding hay in August, and that they weren't very adaptive.
Okay, well, questions, anyone? If you have a question, just get it in the Q&A there right now. Just take a quick minute here. Otherwise, we'll move on to Larry and just say quickly again, thanks, Cameron. That was great. And we'll have some time at the end for more questions and answers. So if you could stay on the Zoom here for a bit, that would be great.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, we might as well get started. And so Larry is over closer to Virden, farms with his family, and something new and interesting. Larry's taken a course with Nicole Masters, sort of learning more about all this good regenerative ag stuff. And maybe you can say a few words about that, and then talk about your farm.
Sure. Yeah, I had a chance to take a course with Nicole Masters. We had a 1-week course in Georgia in spring, and it was very good. Not spring, but in November. It was good. It was 1 week at White Oak Pastures. 20 people are taking the course, 4 of them for Canada. The other 16 are from the United States, and overwhelmed with the people there. Education is just, at my age, going back, it's like taking the university course. You spend an hour and a half online, and you spend 3 hours getting ready for it and following up afterwards. So it's been a challenge, and it's been for the schooling part, but the knowledge and the meeting people has been great. I've really learned a lot. and we'll finish up in April, and then we'll see what happens from there. I am not a high tech like Cameron. My presentation is just going to be me presenting my information to you. I'd like and love what Cameron presented. A lot of what Cameron does and I do are much the same. We started when we moved here in 2003 from Alberta. We set up our place here, and with the drought that year, we learned a lot with the drought, and because I had a past management background to what I was doing, so we tried limited grazing. So we were doing a twice over basically at that time, because we had 5 quarters each fenced, and we just moved them through each quarter. It did provide more grass than we had, and compared to the neighbors, and over time we got more involved with better management. And in 2007 or 8, I took holistic management the first time, presented to the idea of doing a plan graze and going forward. It was interesting, but there was no way I could present it to my wife. So we got a course going in Lenore, and I got my wife to take it with me, and we got a chance to go forward with it, and we were on the same page. So since then, we've been building fences, improving water, and doing better management. And we have seen a world of change happen. And in when I look at it this year and started looking for notes for what I was going to talk about, I found it very tough, because how do I write about what we're doing after 4 years of drought? My pictures were better 5 years ago than they are now. And my information, my yields and stuff were better. So basically, after going through all this, we went through and we did some basic summaries after last year. We still ran 85 pairs with 20 heifers, replacement heifers. That was still double our normal stocking rate when it was when we bought it in 2003. We have 100 acres left stockpiled for the spring of 22. And we had 75 acres that we put in zero till to cover crop into sod, and we're trying to do that. I have 2 sons that are involved and wanting to get involved with the ranch. They are very much wanting to take in what's going on, and they want to try new things. So I am now the old guy trying to step back and let the young guys in. And it's been a very tough thing to take forage out of production to do an annual crop, but they have to learn and see what we're doing. So we took 75 acres that was in a predominantly smooth brome and blue fescue sod fields, and we just clipped them close with the cattle, zero tilled in the seed, and it worked when it had moisture. And when every time it got dry, it stopped growing, it got set back. And next thing we knew, the next shower we had, or decent rain, there'd be another flush of growth coming and it was eye-opening to see how different plants grew at different times. It really amazed us how the peas did. And when we did get a little bit of moisture in fall, how the warm season kicked in. It wasn't a high percentage, but there was some growth there for later on. So when we sat down and did the numbers at the end of the year, we used standard animal units for our measurement, because we have been from everything from yearlings to cow-calf to custom grazing on our land base. So we figured out is just use a standard animal unit, which is a 1,000-pound animal. And that gives us the base to work with. And on our place, when we were good 5-6 years ago, we were running 90 to 100 animal units per acre. Last year, we were between 40 and 45. Surrounding farms around us are running 15 to 30, and that has been on the good years and bad years. So we have done still better, but compared to what we're used to, it's not as good. In the picture there is when we had Dr. Christina Jones from Australia looking at one of our pastures, and she was talking about the soil health and what was going on there that day. And Michael brought her out and did pasture walks with her. So it's very informative and very educational to have somebody of her level wanting to see what we're doing. Our land is very much a rough soil. It is sandy loam with a lot of stones. So breaking land is not something I want to do much of. Zero till is an option on it. So we looked at what we do here is we have a gravel on part of the farm. The other farm is all some shale, thin topsoil. So we've promoted a lot of animal usage and harvesting that with animals. 15 years ago when we started doing this, it was cheaper for us to buy hay in. We could buy it across the fence at that time. Now we're looking at 50 to 100 miles to bring feed in. And this year we actually sent the cow herd out to graze corn because it was still cheaper than trying to feed straw and pellets in our yard. So we look at different things all the time. We have nothing in concrete. Every year is adaptive and we do what we can. Being I'm stepping back a bit, my sons have the choice of what we're doing on the land now more. It is one, they're looked at what we're doing as a place to start. And so I try to explain to them where we came from so we do not step backwards, but they have to make their own mistakes. And it's been eye-opening. We try to make things better. We try to also think of how can we use energy more efficiently? How can we take a byproduct from somebody else or a different enterprise to feed the cows more efficiently? Using residue from other crops is one of the ways we look at it. So like straw or byproducts like that. We need to start looking at what we can do to value add to our cattle, or growing annual crops instead of perennials. Perennials are giving you a cheap source year round, but with the new annuals coming in, we're seeing a higher yield per acre on them, but cost is higher. So it's a give and take. We need to start talking about that because the access to land to do things different is going to be a challenge. In the last few months, I've been questioning the idea of where do we go forward? We've been 4 years into a drought on our place. Not that every year was dry or poor quality, but the moisture came in major events and it had to be managed, otherwise it'd be gone. So we need to step forward and look at what we're doing more efficiently with the water we have available. And capturing every bit of water I can on my land is our ultimate goal, and not having anything leave us. On our land, we have some creeks, and there will always be some runoff, but we have seen the hillsides on the creeks have turned from bare soil to forages growing there now. So we have seen that change. And with the climate change coming, everybody talks about climate change and how it's going to affect us, but nobody talks about how it affects the prairies, especially the northern prairies. So what is going to happen with this? So I've been looking into it, and one of the things that we're saying is that our winters are going to be more moisture, but milder temperature. So we're going to see water running in the wintertime, but our summers are going to go into a slight increase in temperature, but less moisture. So do we start looking at how we present our knowledge going forward for our warm season to cool season ratios? Do we change that a bit? Do we look at how we can get things better, or what is our optimum? There is no plan going ahead, but just thoughts we need to think about. We are doing a good job with what we have, but as we go forward, we have to think about what we can do better. One of the things we've done in our ranch is start breeding our own stock back into it, and we started selecting our own bulls, and we have seen a big improvement in our survival, our breed up of our heifers, and return keeping those cows in the herd longer. So we stopped buying bulls off the farm as much. We use a little more semen bringing in and try back on our own cows. We do buy occasional bull just to get different bloodlines, but we are trying to get cattle that have been selected to management of our style on our land. Like our grazing stocking rates will vary anywhere from it varies according to what gross we have, but we try to move them on a 1 to 2 days. And when we got fast, rapid growing grass, we'll try to move them 3-4 times a day and keep our stocking densities high, get a good trample and move on to a clean spot and give that piece of grass a long recovery time. Half our land is native. It's never been broke because of the stones. The other half is has been farmed at one time, and there are stone fences laying out there. So as we look at that, we realize that we need to manage better. So we have half our land is native species, the other half is tame species. And what we've seen in the last 18 years of doing this is that those species have intermingled. There is no longer strictly a tame land and native. They have now become more mingled together. And at one time I thought it wasn't right, it wasn't pure, so we were fussing about it. Then I come to the conclusion, cows don't care. All we need to do is make sure we have green grass and grass at the right stages for the cows to eat at the right times. And that's all we need to do. Our grazing densities will peak at about 300,000 to 400,000 pounds an acre. And in some seasons, especially in the when we're winter grazing or stuff, we will move a fence every week or so. So the densities are down to 50,000 pounds. We just try to change things up. There is no such thing as right or wrong. It's what works for us at the time. We try to make things as interesting and enjoyable as possible. The fact that both my sons have come back and want to be involved in the farm is a great pride of joy. But on the other side is they're quite the challenge too. I guess it's from the days when we were doing pasture management in the summer, and we would just move the cows at noon, then we'll go find some place to go swimming for the afternoon because it's too hot to work. We made it fun, kept the boys entertained, and it kept us involved too. And it made life interesting and more enjoyable. You just can't be working all the time. And that's basically what I have for a presentation. So I'll let you go ahead.
Larry. So here's a question. What are you doing right now with the herd this winter?
The main cow herd has gone out. They're grazing corn. They're being custom grazed at another person's place.
Yep.
And we've just got the bulls and the replacements at home for the winter, and they're on straw and pellets.
Okay. How's the cow herd on corn doing with the amount of snow we've had this winter?
It's a non-issue. They're getting out there.
Yeah, good.
They've learned how to graze before, so they're grazing right until last year. They started grazing in April 10th, and they grazed until the 19th of December. The year before, we've tried to plan to graze for 300 days a year, but we also plan on feeding for 120 days. So we have an overlap there of different plans that go each way. So some years we'll feed more days, and other years we'll feed less. So this year our goal was to have enough grass available, so we left 100 acres set up for next spring's grazing.
Nice. So you have a backup plan depending what Mother Nature gives you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as a drought management, we try to set one paddock aside each year. And for the last 4 years, we couldn't do it because of the drought. But when we do our plan for grazing for the year, we set aside a paddock we'd like to give it a full season rest on. And it could be tame or native, but we'll try to rotate it around. If nothing else, it'll produce seed on there and tramp some litter back on afterwards.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you mentioned drought planning. What would you have to say to that, to the, sort of the Manitoba or Saskatchewan rancher that's on the call right now, as far as, kind of thinking about a plan for this coming year, not knowing, we may get off to a decent start with good snow right now, but what would you say about drought management planning?
I think drought planning coming into 22 is going to be just as important as it has been the last few years, because we have good moist snow availability in Manitoba and parts of Saskatchewan, but there's a big area that still the ground is dry underneath. We need a lot of spring rains to make an average year yet. We can still get that, but we need to plan what we can go ahead with, and being able to be flexible on your stocking rates gives you a great opportunity. In our case, we dropped the custom herd off last year and gave ourselves more grazing days available for us. But by doing that, we also knew the year before when we told our person we're custom grazing for that we were going to be short grass and water, that he needed to look somewhere else. So it gave him a full season ahead to start planning for it. On our place, we had the grass available. We could have handled more cows, but the water was our biggest limiting factor last year.
Yep.
And right now, unless we start seeing this water table replenish itself, I do not think we should be stepping ahead on our own operation to expand it any bigger.
Blaine?
I guess I'll just echo Larry's words in that on our grazing operation, we knew last spring that water was going to be the issue, so we did not bring any custom cows in. We made that decision. My son runs quite a large flock of sheep, and I have just a small herd of cows left. And we usually bring about 100 pair in every spring as our usual plan to consume the grass that we grow. So we made the decision not to bring the 100 pair in because we knew water was going to be our major issue, and it proved to be correct. But what ended up happening then is that we usually do like Larry, and we do some cost calculations every year, and usually it makes sense for us to buy hay or straw or whatever, grain and straw, whatever we can make work. And when we did the calculations this year, we had so much grass that was going backwards because we didn't have enough cows to eat it. We actually made hay on our own operation this year. So, despite a drought, everybody said, well, there's no grass anywhere. We were making hay this year with, we weren't running quite as many animals, but we were still running a considerable number of animals. So, I guess the thing is you need to be adaptive in this, and you need to be planning out a ways ahead. And if we're looking at 2022, we got snow, we know it will likely be wet starting the year. But if we start to overgraze those pastures right away in the spring by, having continuous grazing, letting the animals take that second bite, that is going to really hurt your production. And if it turns dry, you will be in desperate problems by overgrazing early this year. So, sit down, and Cameron gave us some good examples there. He said, and Larry does it too. He spends a lot of time planning it out, how things are going to work. So I guess we should ask Cameron too, what his thoughts are on grazing or planning for drought. And I guess the other thing I'd say before Cameron goes on is if you're going along in a drought, don't procrastinate. Pick a date and say June 10th or June 20th. If it hasn't rained by then, do something. Start destocking. Because if you wait till the whole community wakes up and says, holy smokes, we got a mess here. Everybody and his dog is hauling cows to the auction market that day. And you know what happens to the price then. So be proactive. And, if it does start to rain after you've destocked cows, well, maybe you can find more cows later on in the season or whatever. Be adaptive. So, don't procrastinate, I guess would be my advice. Cameron.
Yeah, I guess I'm just echoing that, Blaine. I guess for us, we kind of moved some yearlings early on too when the price was good on them. And like whether you made your money in August or September or June or July, it doesn't matter. If you're profitable, you don't need to graze those yearlings for 100 days to make money. So that's kind of what we did. And I guess you're right. If cows are at a good price in April or May and it doesn't look like we're maybe liquidate them. And I don't know, like just be adaptive. And I think there's opportunities here to work with a lot of grain farmers in the area and look at different options to graze. Like I'll go back to our slough grazing. Normally that stuff's wet, right? And that was an opportunity that Dad and I saw. Let's try that. And I think there's opportunities with, whether it's grain farmers and grazing headlands or their fields or some some fields that maybe were rode off. Like, just, this is maybe a time to look for opportunities with neighbors. That's just my advice in drought, because everyone's looking for help and to get through this stuff. So that's my advice on drought. And just to echo Larry, you don't got drinking water. Doesn't matter if you got 10 feet of grass. Cow's got nothing to drink. It's useless. So, and maybe switch to gears like Blaine's haying some, because I imagine Blaine's haying thing was pretty profitable.
Nothing wrong with making profit, Cameron. Larry,
Well,
do you want to share a wee bit about MFGA's exchange deal? Just talking about what Cameron was?
Yes, the MFGA is involved with several other groups, and we're promoting making connections between crop producers and grazers or ranchers to share assets at certain times of the year. If you grow a cover crop and you don't have a way of harvesting it, bringing some custom cattle in might be a way of doing it. And that way, if you're trampling it, you get manure back on the land, the urine's there, and they're off. And it's not like it's a long time period. Or another way of doing it is, say, if you had some residue left at the end of the year, you can bring cattle in and clean up your residue and move on. And so these things are all helpful that can be done that way. And it's based off a system that's been very successful in South Dakota, and I think it's got potential here too.
Yeah, so where do producers find a link to that website? You've set up a website, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, you can find it through Manitoba Forage and Grasslands and
Okay.
the other ones. Yep.
Okay. No, that's a great idea. It makes you realize that, drought does bring opportunities, whether you're grain farming or grass farming. It may be hard sometimes to see them. It's hard not to get down when things are dry, but there are opportunities like what Cameron's suggesting there with grazing some low areas if you're in pothole country. Like an interesting opportunity I see on the grain side, especially in the Red River Valley, when things are dry, is it's a wonderful opportunity to try to get into a no-till system. One of the great difficulties when you're trying no-till when it's wet is it's just very, very hard to get on the land. So my point in saying all that is there are still some opportunities and the challenges like surface water, like Cameron's saying, if you don't have drinking water for the cows, doesn't matter how much grass you have. And that kind of gets me thinking, Blaine, about you dug a dugout there to try to have more water this year. But tell the story about the soil testing that you took when you dug that dugout. You took a soil test at the surface and a soil test at 14 feet. And what was the result for nutrients? Kind of changing gears here a little bit.
No, we're changing gears quite a bit, but anyway.
Well, I know, but yes, you need nutrients and water to grow grass. So it's still kind of.
Yeah. One of the things we hear all the time is that, everyone says they're short of phosphorus. And so in some of the work we've been doing on the General Mills project that Michael and I have been working on is we did a bunch of soil tests called total nutrient digestion, which basically blows the soil apart and looks at all of the nutrients that are available in the soil. And we did this from where this project works from basically an hour west of Yorkton right through to the Red River Valley. And of all those fields that we sampled, there was just about 50 fields done. There wasn't one single field that was short of a single nutrient. Didn't matter whether it was boron or zinc or copper or phosphorus. They all had lots. And so that got me thinking, well, how deep does this phosphorus go? So last winter about this time, I had a dugout dug because I knew it was going to be dry. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and store more water. So when the dugout was finished, before it froze, I went down to the bottom of the dugout and I did a soil sample just to see what was down there. And I sent it to the same lab we used. And I also did a soil sample at the surface. And I believe the numbers, it's fuzzy to me right now, but I think it was 1,400 pounds of phosphorus was available on the surface, 0 to 6. And at between 14 feet and 14.6, there was 900 pounds of phosphorus available. So when you think about that, we know roots go down 10, 12, 14, 16 feet if we have healthy systems. Just think of how much phosphorus there is available in our soils, each 6-inch increment as we go deeper. Like there's no way we'll ever run out of phosphorus in a million years. But what we run out of is the microbiology that makes that phosphorus available to the plant. And that's what regenerative agriculture is all about, is re-stimulating that microbiology so that we don't need to buy as many expensive inputs.
Yeah.
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, so what the total nutrient extraction looked at was the total pool of mineral available and unavailable. So, you know, in a healthy system, like you think like context, what Blaine and Cameron were talking about, our historical ecological context. This was like a large pasture. No one was fertilizing it, yet it was highly productive. Why? Because it had a functioning nutrient cycle. The biology was doing the job, making a little bit of nutrient available every year to grow the grassland, whether it was tall grass, mixed grass, short grass, prairie. So all we need to do really is to reestablish that biological life, get it jump started. And of course, a wonderful way to do that is through cows and grass. Anything to add, Larry, to that?
Yeah, it's last year when we did the cover crop, part of the work we had for some funding on the cover crop is they did the soil test and sent it to Ward Labs. And when the results come back with the microbe life, it was basically dead down there. And basically it was done in mid-August, but that was right when it was the driest. There was very little growing. And so we had absolutely next to nothing. So we're hoping to see this year is how fast we can recover that now. Because once we get some moisture into it and follow up with the same test, because otherwise the soil test showed we were good. We were a little low in nitrogen, but we can grow legumes to balance that out. But everything else is available. But our soil health for microbes is very low, and nematodes and everything else. So as we look at it, we can bring that back. But it's just the fact was it was just so dry that everything went dormant. But I think we can do better.
Yeah, there's still room to improve, but you know, it makes sense, right? Like soil is a subaquatic ecosystem, and all the life in that soil lives on those biofilms on the soil particle, and when there's no water, all that life basically shuts down, goes dormant, goes into spore form or what have you, right? Like, it's not that it isn't there, it's just not functioning.
Right.
As soon as you add water, you know, think of last year. It was dry, you know, all through July, drier into early August. Then we started to get those rains mid-August. There would have been this huge flush of life as that rain infiltrated into the soil, and the biology and the plants, you know, got back to, you know, like for a good example would be anyone who planted a fall seeded cover crop middle of August or a winter cereal. They had a wonderful fall and good establishment and good growth because, you know, we had those nice rains early August or mid-August, early September.
Right.
Blaine?
One thing I've noticed on my place in the last couple of years, we haven't pushed our native pastures as hard because we're trying to get more native species to show up. But we've seen an increase of brush encroachment, especially wolf willow and snowberry. Well, this year with the amount of snowberry and wolf willow, we're very glad we have them out there because we have caught all the neighbor snow that's moving. You would not be able to move out there because there's snow is up to your hips because that's how high it is. And at one time I thought we had to have none of that out there. Now I'm happy to have the fact that we have some there, but as long as we can get sunlight to the ground so the grasses grow, that's all we need to do. The cattle can graze around them and keep going. The more diversity we got, the better it is, the way I look at it.
Absolutely. And you look under that snowberry or wolf willow, and there'll be more grass potentially or more diversity growing underneath there as well, because things like, especially wolf willow actually fixes nitrogen. It does do nitrogen fixation, right? So there's all these other good things going on in those soils to help provide a little nitrogen. Another interesting like new information for us over the past 5 years is, you know, we used to believe that the only way to grow nitrogen was through a legume, right, through nitrogen fixation. And it's not like that isn't important, but if you look at historically, going back to context again, historically native prairie across Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta was probably about 75% grass, 20% 20% forbs, which is basically, you know, wildflowers, and 5% legumes, and then some shrubby stuff in that mix as well. So there wasn't a high amount of legumes in these systems. So how were they so productive? Where was the nitrogen coming from to drive production? Well, there are other mechanisms where nitrogen's made available through free living nitrogen fixers that don't need to associate with a legume. They're called diazotrophs. And in a healthy system where you have good aggregation, good soil health, they actually, where air is able to move into that soil, like if you think about soil, it needs porosity, not just for water infiltration, but for air movement, for gas exchange through that soil. And, you know, air is 78% nitrogen. That air can enter into the soil and be fixed by these free living nitrogen fixers. So that was probably one of the main mechanisms of how nitrogen was made available to a growing plant. Because, you know, we know in natural systems, nitrogen's always sort of a limiting factor. So that's kind of a cool, if we can build soil health and soil aggregation, we'll probably actually increase availability of nitrogen through that sort of increased in soil health and giving a happy home to these diazotrophs so they can do their job of fixing a little bit of nitrogen. Blaine?
Yeah, so I just, when Larry was talking there about, you know, having a little bit of brush, and the snow trap potential is enormous. But one of the things that a lot of grazers say, well, the brush keeps spreading. And if you use continuous grazing where the cows can go where they wish, when they want, the brush will continue to spread out. And so this particular picture here was taken a few years ago on my farm. And we don't want to get rid of the brush, but I also want to grow grass in there. And so we used high stalk density, and you can see that it was fairly tough on those chokecherry saplings. We didn't wipe them out, but now light will go down in there and we can grow all kinds of other things in there. The chokecherries will come back, but they won't come back near as thick. And we now have the opportunity to come back there and, 60 or 70 or 80 days of recovery time, or 100 days or whatever it is, and get another grazing. And by using that high stock density, Cameron showed us pictures a while ago on his farm, you can see how the cows ate some, but probably the hooves tramped down as much, which gives you excellent cover on the soil. Get that armor on the soil to keep that land covered, cool, keep those microbes working. And the other thing that it does is when we get a big rain event, we all know it will rain at some point in the future, but if it's 5 inches in 1 hour, water will run real easily on something like this. It's just like a giant sponge. Even a 5-inch rain will usually totally suck right into that soil if you have that kind of armor on the surface.
Questions, anyone? I still don't see any questions. Someone must have a question about grazing. Summer grazing
today.
I got a quick question. It is a quiet group today, which is okay. Just around getting into the amp grazing and getting into the grazing that you guys do, for someone looking to start out, or someone who has never has just had traditional farming and grazing, what's some of the hurdles that are the biggest hurdles that you guys have had to encounter, whether it's financial or cultural or patience, or what are some of those big hurdles that you guys had to get over to be successful at what you're doing?
Well, for
Probably
me,
in my case,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Larry.
For me, the biggest thing was realizing I didn't have to do it all one day. Give myself time. I can build on each year, do a little bit more. Cattle can walk to water for several years until you get the water systems put in right. And we adjust things all the time. Like our herd changes in size and shapes. So the fact is that we've run up to 200 cows as a unit. and sometimes we're down now to the less because of the drought, but we change our paddocks to size, so we keep it very flexible. And the only permanent fences we put in are the ones on native divisions. And other than that, we do mostly use polywire to break it up to sizes that we can manage, and trail to water. And hopefully we get some water put in, develop it a little more each year as we go, but you don't have to do it all at one time. Next.
You got words of
Cameron?
wisdom, Cameron?
Yeah, go ahead, Cameron.
You're muted, Cameron.
Yep, you're muted.
Sorry, you hear me there?
Yeah.
Yep, go ahead.
For us, I guess, just kind of echoing what Larry said, you don't got to do it all at once, and just following some of those principles, like Blaine touched on it, getting those cows off there in 5 days, or if you follow that and then letting the grass regrow. So pick a time. I'll say 70 days you want to come back, or 50 days, and kind of have a relatively rigid set of rules to start, and follow that, and then just react as you're going. And I came across a quote looking for something the other day, and a good plan today is better than the perfect plan tomorrow. So just come up with a plan, and you'll learn. And some of the stuff you talk about, getting over the stigma of neighbors, and I think it's kind of there, but I think they do see the advantage of it, and I think it's really going to come to light here in the next coming years. I think we've got a big opportunity in regenerative agriculture to promote grazing practices as this drought progresses, but hopefully it's over. But I think people are maybe going to see. So that's what I've said. Just start trying. That's my advice.
I'll echo both Larry and Cameron's words. When I started, I'd never owned a cow in my life. I was a high-tech grain farmer, so I had a real learning curve. But I guess what I think I've learned over the years, that if you're a continuous grazer on a quarter section, if you put one fence down the middle and move your cows from one side for 2 weeks or 3 weeks and then on to the other side, that is a huge step forward. And it doesn't, as Cameron says, it doesn't have to be perfect in year one. You know, the three of us that are talking here, we've all been doing this for a long time, and we've got reasonably good at doing it, but we certainly weren't very good the first year we tried it. And it always makes me really nervous when somebody listens to me or someone else speak and they get all excited and they go buy 2 loads of posts and they're going to start pounding posts everywhere. Don't do that. Go slow, learn how to do it. Take your time, get a feel for it, use temporary fences, and then once you kind of have a feel for it, then start to pound a few posts and make some permanent fence. Because there's nothing wrong with putting a whole bunch of capital in or a water system in, and it's in the wrong place. And I've seen many examples of that where guys go a little bit too fast, to get too excited. And so just go slow and learn how to do it. And if you split that quarter section in half the first year and you kind of see an improvement, split it again the next year, do 4 pieces. And then pretty soon you got 8 pieces, and on and on you go, and you just get better and more sophisticated as you go.
Yeah, we have to be sort of realistic in an imperfect world. I liked what Cameron had to say. Like, let's not let perfect get in the way of good. Let's just get started, and make a plan and work with what you have. Like Blaine's saying, you don't need to go out and spend a bunch of money. Work with what you have. It may not be the perfect tool, what you have for equipment or whatever, but going broke. One of our favorite phrases is it's hard to be green if you're in the red. So be careful with buying stuff and getting into debt. So little bit of advice there.
Yeah, and from a financial perspective, I know as a little plug for the watershed districts and some other organizations, there are financial programming more and more coming out year after year in regards to helping farmers with that infrastructure, whether it's fencing or watering systems. So check with your watershed districts, check with Manitoba Habitat Heritage Corporation, Manitoba Forage and Grasslands associations like that, groups like that are coming out with more and more funding and programming opportunities for this kind of activities and this kind of infrastructure.
Yeah, it looks like we're still some uncertainty how it's going to be delivered, but the the feds announced that on-farm climate action fund, and one of the priorities is improved grazing management. So there's going to be some money available for things like improving water systems, fencing, all that good stuff, improving grazing management overall. So keep an eye out for that. And, if you are planning to spend some money, keep your invoices. You may be able to get some funding to help out.
Well, I guess I encourage people to reach out to someone who's doing it, or a neighbor, or like the power of a community is pretty strong. And even if they're not experienced in AMP grazing, just reach out and ask somebody. But if you get someone that's done it, reach out to them and just ask them a question, because it's amazing how much you can come up with in just a 5-minute conversation with someone else that's like-minded. And because sometimes you get so narrowed into what the problem is, when they stop and really say, what's going on here, the answer is actually way over here. When you're focusing on this little problem, and it's not a problem, like, because so often but I might just share a picture of something we're talking about when Blaine was talking about, because there's water infiltration. Is that all right, Michael, if I just show
Yeah,
go ahead.
cool.
Oh, go ahead, for sure. Thank
So
you.
just going back to, you guys see that now, that pasture that's continuous grazed and AMP grazed?
Yep.
So this is the same. I'm going to flip to the next slide, but this is the same day. I just panned over left and right. Oh, where did it go now? So the continuous grade, I just panned over and looked kind of straight west. So you can see the water standing, and there's lots of grass there. The AMP graze looked over, and there's no water standing there. So, looking at that continuous graze pasture, it looks pretty healthy to me. Like, there's grass there to graze. This was a few years ago. So, when I took these pictures, I realized what was going on. And then just coming across this slide, it's the water compaction and how much water is evaporating and saving us as beef producers. I think we're really cognizant of slowing down water on our farms and hopefully getting it to not evaporate, but absorb into the soil versus running off. And I can't say that enough. And it just goes back to what, Dan, you were kind of talking about, all those different programs. There's different things to activate. And I think Manitoba Habitat, ducks, keep naming the list. Like, the watershed districts want to see healthy, resilient ecosystems, just like we do, although for different reasons, right? Like, I want a healthy, resilient ecosystem to feed cows or other livestock. And the watershed districts want a healthy watershed, and Manitoba Habitat wants habitat for birds, pollinators, and ducks. Obviously, it's the same thing at the end of the day. So does it really matter if we want the same end goal, as long as we can get through it and come up with a good solution?
Yep. Thanks, Cameron. A couple of questions here. Here's one for Cameron. As a watershed district, we're looking at purchasing a zero-till drill. Cameron, how did the John Deere drill work in that much residue?
Pretty good. I guess we're lucky. Our little grazing club's got a John Deere no-till drills we just use locally, and it worked really, really well. I'm not a crop farmer, and I'm not going to fool you to give you any advice on it, but it worked really well for that seed placement, the way it cut through. I would promote the John Deere drill as my suggestion.
Yeah, it's a single disc opener, and those seem to be probably the best for high residue and low disturbance.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago we added scales to our system, and it really made a big difference, I think, in helping guys seed some different polycrops and stuff. That was kind of, I know some of you guys might know Pat Waller, but he was a big push behind that, and it really helped dial in when you're seeding more than 2 or 3 things.
Yep. Yeah, you're very fortunate. Go ahead, Larry.
We used the John Deere drill that Cameron's got over there with Grazing Club for doing our zero-till into our polycrop into our sod, and it worked well. And it was actually amazed that you could just see it come up. And then we listened to slipped my mind, but the soil health expert out of Alberta there, she says that you need to Chris Nichols says that you don't need to kill your plant soil, you just need to set it back so that the annuals will have a chance to get ahead of it. And the boys were out there seeding. It was plus 40 that day, and we got the seed in the ground, and we got a heavy rain, 3 inches of rain a week later, and it just popped up beautiful. until it all burnt off after, but it did start up well.
And
And
the
it's just one
key
of
is
those more-
like the key is to get that good seed soil contact, right?
Yes.
So you can give that plant a chance to get going. Comment here from Andrea about community. What Cameron was saying is community is key. Bouncing ideas off other people makes problem solving a lot easier. Yeah, we've come to realize that, Blaine and I, that building a community where farmers can share with each other and build trust and is yeah, just probably the most powerful thing. And I think, you know, in the 21st century here, where we seem to want to pick teams and fight, is you know, community is going to be so important. So yeah, absolutely. Question here again, just in regards to the scale on the drill, can you elaborate a little more on that, Cameron?
Oh, I forget where we got it out of, I think John Deere and Brandon, but it was the third party, and all we'd do is just lift the seed box up and just bolt the scale on. There were just 4 little load bars. It took 4 or 5 of us a few hours, but you also got to factor in, this is our Woodworth Grazing Club, and there might have been some beverages involved. But tell Lisa, my wife, that we were working the whole time.
Yeah. But the point is, the scales allow you to.
How it worked? Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess before we were always just going by the seed charts and how much, kind of guessing how much we were seeding, and then
Right.
by mixing these different polycrops, it was really easy to dial in. You know, if I got a mix of sorghum, sunflowers, and turnip or whatever, I could dial in and say I want 42 pounds an acre. I could get that darn close with the acre counter in the scale. Versus before, I'm a bad crop farmer, and I'd be seeding the last 2 rows and there'd be nothing in the drill. So it dialed it in a lot easier for me. But does that answer the question?
That did, yeah. And Cameron, what you were saying there about, you know, you're very fortunate where you are. You have that really strong community where you know, you'll get together and have a beer and do something productive, like you know, put the scales on that drill, and then it's, you know, available for the whole community. So another example of the importance of community. And that's it. We have no more questions, and we're getting very close to our 2-hour limit. So what do you think, Dan? Is that a good place to wrap it up?
I think so. I think it's been great, and this is a good time to just remind Cameron that this is being recorded. So we
Yeah, Lisa could.
Too late, Cameron.
He can find you out. Yeah. I think she already knows you. Yeah.
possible. No, I just want to thank you all for Larry and Cameron and Blaine and Michael for your great presentations today, and Blaine and Michael for the last 2 workshops. I think the conversation around implementing regenerative practices is just starting, and having events like this, whether it's through Living Labs or other venues, is going to go a long way to helping, you know, the community implement some of these things and improve the soil in Manitoba. So big thank you to you, big thank you to the attendees that attended today. Appreciate the feedback and the questions and the dialogue. I'm going to quickly share one sec. So I'm just throwing up the Manitoba Association of Watersheds website on Living Labs Eastern Prairies. Just to remind everybody that coming up next Monday on the 14th, we have a cover crops in Southern Manitoba presentation from Yvonne Lawley, Dr. Yvonne Lawley, and her research group at the University of Manitoba. Will be providing some insight into the work that they've been doing, the research they've been doing, on the survey that they did on cover cropping in the prairies, including Manitoba. Some great informative stuff. And I know cover crop has come up a lot in the last 2 workshops around regenerative agriculture. And so this will be a great workshop for anyone to attend that's either interested in getting into cover cropping or is already doing cover cropping and is looking for more information or more experiences and results that people have because we all know cover cropping can be a really intricate process as to what you put in the ground and what works and what doesn't work for your farm. So really looking forward to that one on Monday. And then next Wednesday, we are wrapping up our workshops with an interview style workshop where I will be interviewing some of the Living Labs producers and AAFC researchers around their experiences with Living Labs over the past 3 years and going into the final year of Living Labs Eastern Prairies and beyond, and talking about what's to come, hopefully with another iteration of Living Labs in Manitoba. So hoping everyone can join that. It'll be a very laid back interview style workshop on Wednesday, February 16th, that time. So I wanted to also have a huge thank you to the watershed districts and all of our Living Labs partners. There's 4 watershed districts that are involved with Living Labs Eastern Prairies: the Assiniboine West Watershed District, the Pembina Valley Watershed District, the Red Boyne Watershed District, and the St. Rat-Rosso Watershed District that are involved with Living Labs Eastern Prairies. But like I said earlier, all the watershed districts have programming that farmers should be looking into, whether it's financial or any other supports that these watershed districts provide. So please look into that with them. But other than that, that is all I have. And unless Michael, you have anything closing you want to say, we'll wrap it up for the day.
Yeah, well, just thanks, Dan. Thanks, Living Labs and Watersheds and Cameron and Larry and Blaine. Thanks, everybody, for another good webinar.
Yeah, you bet. And we will be following up with an email to all the registrants with links to the video from today on our website, as well as presentations that we can share. And so look for that in your email over the next little while, and we will provide information on follow-up information and future work.
Just one more thing, Dan, just
Yeah.
reach out. Don't be scared to get a hold of any of us or a neighbor. Most people are more than willing to share. So don't feel you need to invent the wheel by yourself. Get help.
Yep. Good point.
All right, everyone, take care and
Right.
enjoy the
Thank you,
mild weather.
Dan.
Stay safe.
Yep.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.